The white silence. The world had shrunk to the four walls of our tiny cabin, a single point of warmth and life in a universe of white. Outside, the wind howled like a hungry wolf, and the snow, which had been falling for a week, had buried the world in a deep, silent blanket. It was the winter of 1886, a winter that would later be called the Great White Hurricane, and we were trapped in its icy grip. I was 10 years old, and I remember the cold as a physical presence, a constant aching weight that seeped through the chinks in the logs and settled deep in our bones. I remember the silence, a profound ringing quiet that was broken only by the crackle of the fire and the howl of the wind. And I remember the fear, a cold, hard knot in my stomach that tightened with each passing day. But I also remember the smell of pine from the boughs my mother had hung over the hearth, the taste of the dried apple rings she had carefully saved for a special occasion, and the sound of my father's voice, calm and steady, as he told us stories of Christmases past. I remember the warmth of my sister's hand in mine as we huddled together under a pile of quilts, and the fierce, unwavering love that bound our family together in the face of the storm. This is the story of how my family, and countless others like us, survived the coldest Christmas in the wilderness. It is a story of ingenuity, of resilience, of the simple, practical skills that kept us alive when the world turned against us. It is a story of the enduring power of family, of the quiet strength of the human spirit, and of the profound and unexpected beauty that can be found in the heart of the harshest winter. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. Section 1. The Fortress of Logs. Our first line of defense against the cold was our cabin, a small, sturdy structure that my father had built with his own two hands. It was not much to look at, just a single room with a loft for sleeping, but it was a fortress against the storm. The walls were made of thick, hand-hewn logs, chinked with a mixture of mud, moss, and animal hair to keep out the wind. The roof was made of split cedar shakes, and the floor was made of rough-sawn planks, a luxury in a world where many families still lived on dirt floors. But the heart of our home was the fireplace, a massive stone structure that dominated one wall of the cabin. It was our only source of heat, our only source of light, and our only means of cooking. My father, a man who understood the physics of heat and airflow in a way that no modern engineer ever could, had designed it with a deep, wide firebox that could hold a massive backlog, a log so large that it would burn for days. He had also built a fireback, a wall of flat stones behind the fire that would absorb the heat and radiate it back into the room, long after the flames had died down. Every day my father would venture out into the storm to gather firewood, a dangerous and exhausting task. He would return covered in snow, his beard and eyebrows white with frost, but he would always have a load of wood on his back. He taught me how to identify the best wood for burning. Hickory and oak, he said, were the kings of firewood. They burned slow and hot, producing a steady, reliable heat that would last through the long winter nights. Pine and cedar, on the other hand, were good for kindling, for getting a fire started quickly, but they burned too fast and left too much creosote in the chimney. He taught me how to stack the wood so that it would dry properly, with air circulating between the logs, and how to build a fire that would produce the maximum amount of heat with the minimum amount of smoke. But our most important survival tool was not the cabin or the fireplace. It was the simple, practical knowledge of how to conserve heat. We lived our lives in a small, tight circle around the fire. We cooked, we ate, we slept, we worked, all within the warm embrace of the hearth. My mother would hang wet clothes on a line strung near the fire, and the steam would add moisture to the dry, cold air. We wore layers of wool and fur, and we slept under a mountain of quilts and buffalo robes, our bodies pressed together for warmth. We hung a heavy quilt over the door to keep out the drafts, and we stuffed rags and moss into any cracks or crevices that we could find. My father had even built a small cold room just inside the door, a buffer zone between the outside world and the warm interior of the cabin. We even brought the animals into the cabin at night, our milk cow, our 2 goats, and our small flock of chickens. Their body heat added to the warmth of the room, and their presence was a comfort in the long, dark nights. It was a hard and cramped existence, but it was a warm one, and in the heart of that brutal winter, warmth was life. Section 2. The Winter Larder. With the cabin secured against the cold, our next concern was food. We had spent the autumn preparing for the winter, and our small root cellar was stocked with potatoes, carrots, and turnips, all carefully layered in sand to keep them from freezing or rotting. My mother had spent weeks canning and preserving the bounty of our summer garden, and the shelves of our cabin were lined with jars of green beans, corn, and tomatoes, their contents glowing like jewels in the firelight. We had a barrel of salted pork, a side of bacon, and a haunch of venison that my father had shot in the late fall. We had a sack of flour, a keg of molasses, and a small but precious supply of sugar and salt. But as the storm raged on, our supplies began to dwindle. The venison was the first to go, then the bacon. The salted pork, which we ate sparingly, was a constant source of worry. My mother would carefully ration each meal, making sure that every scrap of food was used. She would save the bacon grease for cooking, the bones for soup, the vegetable peelings for the animals. Nothing was wasted, nothing could be wasted. My father, a man who refused to be defeated, took matters into his own hands. He would venture out into the storm with his rifle, his face a grim mask of determination, his eyes scanning the white landscape for any sign of life. He would be gone for hours, and my mother and I would wait, our hearts in our throats, until we heard the familiar crunch of his boots on the snow, the sound of the door scraping open, and his voice, hoarse and tired, calling out that he was home. He would return, cold and exhausted, but he would always have something for the pot, a rabbit, a squirrel, a brace of grouse. He taught me how to set snares for rabbits, how to track a deer in the snow, and how to read the subtle signs of animal life in the frozen landscape. My mother, in her own quiet way, was just as resourceful. She could make a meal out of almost anything. She would stretch our meager supplies with a skill that bordered on magic. She would make a hearty stew out of a single rabbit, a handful of potatoes, a few dried herbs from her summer garden, and a generous dollop of flour to thicken the broth. She would bake a dense, dark bread that would stick to our ribs and keep us warm from the inside out, using cornmeal, a bit of flour, and molasses for sweetness. She would make a sweet, sticky molasses candy that was a rare and precious treat in a world of hardship, boiling the molasses until it was thick and dark, then pouring it onto a buttered plate to cool. But our most important food source was the corn we had grown. We had a crib full of it, and it was the foundation of our winter diet. We ate it boiled, roasted, and ground into meal for cornbread. It was a simple, humble food, but it was the food that kept us alive. Section 3. A Christmas in the Wilderness. As Christmas approached, a sense of gloom settled over our small cabin. The storm showed no signs of abating, and our supplies were running dangerously low. The salted pork was almost gone, reduced to a few greasy chunks at the bottom of the barrel. The last of the venison had been eaten, the bones boiled for soup. We were down to a few potatoes, their skins wrinkled and soft, a handful of carrots, and the corn that was the staple of our diet. It was a bleak and cheerless prospect for a holiday that was meant to be a time of joy and celebration. One evening, as we sat huddled around the fire, my sister asked the question that had been weighing on all our minds. Will we have Christmas this year? Her voice was small and uncertain, and I could see the fear in her eyes. not just the fear of missing a holiday, but the deeper fear that perhaps we had lost something essential, that the wilderness had taken from us not just our comfort, but our humanity. My mother looked at my father, and in that glance I saw a silent conversation pass between them. My father's face was drawn and tired, his eyes shadowed with worry, but my mother's jaw was set with determination. "Yes," she said firmly, "we will have Christmas. We will have Christmas because that is what makes us who we are. That is what separates us from the animals outside. We are not just surviving, we are living." And so began the most extraordinary effort I have ever witnessed. My mother, a woman of indomitable spirit, threw herself into the preparations with a fierce, almost desperate energy. She was determined that we would have a Christmas, no matter what. She spent the days leading up to the holiday in a flurry of activity. She scrubbed the cabin from top to bottom, sweeping the floor, washing the windows with melted snow, and polishing the pewter plates until they shone. She hung boughs of pine and cedar over the hearth, filling the small room with the fresh, clean scent of the forest, a reminder of the world beyond our four walls. But it was the gifts that required the greatest sacrifice. My mother had brought with her from the East a small music box, a treasured possession from her own mother, inlaid with mother-of-pearl and silver. It was one of the few beautiful things we owned, and she would wind it up on special occasions, letting the delicate melody fill the cabin. I had seen her hold it sometimes, her eyes distant, remembering a life that seemed impossibly far away. One afternoon, I found her at the table, carefully prying the silver inlay from the lid of the music box with my father's smallest knife. Her hands were shaking, and there were tears on her cheeks. "Mother, what are you doing?" I asked, horrified. She looked up at me, and her smile was both sad and radiant. "I'm making your sister a Christmas present," she said, "a locket. She's been so brave through all of this, and she deserves something beautiful." She had fashioned a tiny locket from the silver, and inside she had placed a lock of her own hair and a pressed wildflower from the summer. It was a gift of love, but it was also a sacrifice, a piece of her past, of her connection to the world she had left behind, given freely to bring joy to her child. My father, too, made his own sacrifice. He had a pocket watch, a gift from his own father, that he had carried through years of wilderness living. It was his most prized possession, and he would wind it every night before bed, the familiar ritual a connection to his past. On Christmas Eve, I saw him at the workbench, carefully removing the brass case and fashioning it into a small whistle for me. "Every boy needs a whistle," he said gruffly, not meeting my eyes. "And every man needs to know when to let go of the past to build the future." My mother also told us stories of Christmases past, and in those stories, I began to understand the true meaning of what we were doing. She spoke of Christmas in Pennsylvania, where she had grown up, of the big house with its warm fires and laden tables, of the church services and the caroling, of the presents wrapped in bright paper and tied with ribbons. But she also spoke of the Christmas after her father had died, when money was scarce and the future uncertain, and how her mother had made a feast out of almost nothing, had sung carols with a voice full of hope, had insisted that they celebrate, because celebration was an act of defiance against despair. "Christmas," my mother said, her voice soft but firm, "is not about the abundance of things. It is about the abundance of love. It is about remembering that even in the darkest times, there is light. It is about holding on to hope, to faith, to the belief that tomorrow will be better." That is what we are doing here. We are not just celebrating a holiday. We are declaring that we will not be defeated. We are declaring that we are still a family, still human, still capable of joy. On Christmas Eve, we gathered around the small, lopsided Christmas tree that my father had fashioned from a pine branch. My mother had decorated it with strings of popcorn and cranberries, and with the small, hand-carved ornaments that my father had made in the long winter evenings. A tiny horse, a star, a simple cross. But she had also added something new, small pieces of cloth torn from an old dress, each one tied with a ribbon of yarn, and on each one she had written a wish or a prayer. For health, for spring, for home, for love. My father read to us from the family Bible, his voice a low, steady rumble in the quiet room. He read the story of the Nativity of Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus, born in a stable, far from home, with nothing but their faith and their love to sustain them. It was a story that resonated with us in a way it never had before. We too were far from home. We too had nothing but our faith and our love. And yet we had everything. My mother sang carols in a clear, sweet voice that seemed to rise above the howl of the wind. Silent night, O little town of Bethlehem, hark, the herald angels sing. And as she sang, I felt something shift inside me. The fear, the cold, the hunger, they were still there, but they no longer defined us. We were more than our suffering. We were a family. We were survivors. We were bearers of light in the darkness. We drank hot, spiced cider made from dried apples and cinnamon, and ate the last of the dried apple rings, savoring each sweet, chewy bite. My mother gave my sister the silver locket, and my sister's face lit up with a joy so pure and radiant that it brought tears to my eyes. My father gave me the brass whistle, and I blew it once, the sound sharp and clear in the small cabin, a sound of defiance and of hope. And my sister and I gave our parents the only gifts we could, drawings we had made on precious scraps of paper, crude but heartfelt images of our family. Together, safe, home. It was a simple, humble celebration, but it was filled with a warmth and a love that no storm could extinguish. In that moment, in that small, warm cabin, we were rich beyond measure. We had transformed our suffering into something sacred. We had made Christmas not in spite of the wilderness, but because of it. On Christmas morning, we awoke to a world that was still buried in snow. But the wind had died down, and a pale, watery sun was struggling to break through the clouds, casting long blue shadows across the white landscape. My father went out with his rifle, his movements slow and deliberate, and for the first time in a week, we heard the sharp crack of a gunshot echoing across the frozen valley. He returned a short time later with a fat wild turkey, its feathers iridescent in the pale sunlight, a Christmas miracle that seemed to have been sent from heaven itself. My mother's eyes filled with tears of joy and relief. "God has not forgotten us," she whispered. "Even here, in this wilderness, He has not forgotten us." My mother roasted the turkey in the fireplace, basting it with bacon grease and herbs, and the smell of it filled the cabin, a rich, savory aroma that was the most wonderful smell in the world. We ate until we were full, and then we ate some more. We had mashed potatoes made creamy with the last of the butter. We had gravy, thick and rich. We had cornbread, hot and steaming. We had a feast, a banquet, a celebration of life and of survival. But more than the food, more than the gifts, what I remember most about that Christmas was the transformation it wrought in us. Before Christmas, we had been a family struggling to survive, each day a grim battle against the cold and the hunger. But after Christmas, we were something more. We were a family that had chosen joy in the face of despair. We were a family that had declared, through our celebration, that we would not merely endure, we would live, we would love, we would hope. That Christmas became a touchstone for us, a memory we would return to again and again in the hard days that followed. Whenever the cold seemed too bitter, whenever the hunger seemed too sharp, we would remember that Christmas, and we would remember that we were capable of creating light in the darkness, of finding beauty in the harshest circumstances, of transforming suffering into something sacred. We had a Christmas that I will never forget, a Christmas that was made all the more precious by the hardship that surrounded it, a Christmas that taught me that the true meaning of the holiday is not found in abundance, but in the courage to celebrate, even when celebration seems impossible. Section 4. The Unseen Dangers. But the cold and the hunger were not the only dangers we faced. The wilderness was a place of hidden perils, and the storm had made it even more so. The deep snow could hide a treacherous patch of ice, smooth and invisible, beneath the white blanket. It could hide a fallen log, waiting to trip an unwary traveler. It could hide a deep drift, soft and powdery, that could swallow a man whole, leaving him struggling and gasping for air. The constant wind could cause a tree to fall without warning. The extreme cold could freeze a man's lungs. In minutes, frostbite was a constant threat, and my father was acutely aware of the danger. My father never left the cabin without his rifle, his hatchet, and his snowshoes. He taught me to read the signs of the weather, to walk on snowshoes, to build a shelter in the snow, and to find my way back to the cabin in a whiteout. But the greatest danger was not from the elements. It was from the loneliness. The isolation of the wilderness could be a crushing weight, a constant, gnawing presence that could drive a man to madness. We had not seen another human being in months, and the silence of the forest could be a terrifying thing. The only sounds were the howl of the wind, the crackle of the fire, and the occasional cry of a distant animal. It was a silence that pressed in on you, that made you question your own sanity, that made you long for the sound of another human voice. We fought against the loneliness with stories and with songs, with the simple, everyday tasks of survival, and with the quiet, unspoken bond of family. My father would tell us stories of his youth, of his adventures in the wilderness, of the people he had known and the places he had been. My mother would sing to us, her voice a lifeline in the dark, and we would work together, each of us doing our part, knowing that our survival depended on our unity, on our love for one another. Section 5. The Thaw. After what seemed like an eternity, the storm finally broke. The wind died down, the snow stopped falling, and the sun came out, a brilliant, blinding light that made the world sparkle and shine like a field of diamonds. The temperature began to rise, slowly at first, then more rapidly. The snow began to melt, dripping from the eaves of the cabin, running in small rivulets down the hillside. The world, which had been a frozen, silent tomb, was coming back to life. We emerged from our cabin like bears from hibernation, blinking in the bright sunlight, our eyes unaccustomed to the glare. The world was a changed place. The trees were heavy with snow, their branches drooping to the ground under the weight. The familiar landmarks of our small clearing were gone, buried under a thick white blanket. The woodpile was a mound of white. The barn was half buried. It was a world of breathtaking beauty, but it was also a world of immense danger. The melting snow could cause avalanches, floods, and ice dams. My father, ever practical, immediately set to work. He cleared a path to the woodpile, shoveling the heavy, wet snow with a wide, flat shovel. He checked the snares, finding 2 rabbits frozen stiff in the wire loops. He began to repair the damage that the storm had done to our small barn, replacing a broken board, tightening a loose hinge. I helped him, my small hands clumsy but willing, my heart filled with a sense of pride and purpose. We worked together, father and son, in the bright, cold sunlight. And in that shared labor, I felt a sense of connection, a sense of belonging. Thus, I had never known before. I was no longer just a child. I was a partner, a contributor, a member of the team, and in that moment, I understood what it meant to be a frontiersman, to be a survivor, to be a man. Conclusion. A legacy of resilience. That winter was the hardest of my life, but it was also the most important. It taught me the meaning of survival, of resilience, of the quiet, unyielding strength of the human spirit. It taught me the importance of family, of the bonds that tie us together and give us the strength to endure. And it taught me the profound and unexpected beauty that can be found in the heart of the harshest winter. Many years later, when I was a man with a family of my own, I would tell my children the story of that Christmas. I would tell them of the cold, of the hunger, of the fear, but I would also tell them of the warmth, of the love, of the quiet, simple joy of a family huddled together in a small cabin in the heart of the wilderness. I would tell them of the fat wild turkey that my father had shot, of the lopsided Christmas tree that my mother had decorated, of the sweet, sticky molasses candy that had tasted like the most wonderful thing in the world. And I would tell them that the greatest gift we can give to our children is not the one that comes in a brightly wrapped package, but the one that comes from the heart. It is the gift of love, of family, of the simple, practical knowledge of how to survive in a world that is not always kind. It is the gift of resilience, of the quiet, unyielding strength that is the true legacy of the American frontier. I would tell them that the lessons I learned in that small cabin, in the heart of that brutal winter, are lessons that have stayed with me all my life. They are lessons about the importance of preparation, of hard work, of ingenuity. They are lessons about the power of love, of faith, of hope. They are lessons about the enduring strength of the human spirit and about the profound connection between a family and the land that sustains them. And I would tell them that, no matter how hard life gets, no matter how cold the wind blows, no matter how dark the night, there is always hope. There is always the warmth of the fire, the love of family, and the promise of a new day. That is the true legacy of the American frontier, and it is a legacy that we must never forget.